Do you have previous versions of MudPi running on older units like this? I'm upgrading some of my own units to the latest version of MudPi to try out the new features available. Join me today as I upgrade my own units, old and new, to the latest versions. I'll be taking them and migrating them completely and getting them deployed back in the field. And learn from my mistakes. Leave yourself a little bit more room to get your SD card out. I'm going to get this thing out and we can get started. First, I'm going to back up all my old configurations and files. I'll use the scp-r command to recursively copy everything off of our Pi here. Previously, everything used to be installed into the etc folder. Let's just go ahead and copy everything out into a backup directory. Depending on how many files you've accumulated, it could take a couple minutes or a couple seconds. Once everything's copied over, go ahead and verify that you've copied it before you flash your SD card. Then I'm going to go ahead and pop my SD card out, flash it with the new Raspberry OS, and reinstall MudPi. You can check out the getting started video if you need help with that part. So now let's go ahead and do that, and I'll come back when that's all finished. Alright, I got a fresh install of Raspberry OS and MudPi. I'm going to take this old configuration file now and migrate it to the latest version. Just taking a peek here at some of the old stuff I had in here. I got some different relays, some triggers, some sensors. Looks like we got a good variety. I'm going to first run this through the migration tool to take a bulk of the configuration conversion out for me. After that's done, we'll go through manually and fine tune the rest of it. We're going to run it through the migration tool first and take a bulk of the work out for us. Using the help flag here, you can see a list of the commands available for MudPi. We're looking for the migrate configuration command here. Also, if you want to specify a path to the configuration that you want to convert, you should use the configuration flag. So we're going to go ahead and use both here. So let's type in mudpi --config. We'll specify a path to our existing old configuration file. We're then going to type in migrate config, followed by the path and file name of the new configuration that we want, which we'll just save it as something new or the name mudpi.config, whatever you'd like. If you already have a file with the same name, it's going to throw an error. Just specify the overwrite flag if you want to save over that. This way you don't accidentally overwrite existing configuration files. Looks like everything's converted successfully. Now we need to go through it again manually and do some final edits, and then we can import it into MudPi and run it. I have my configuration file opened up in my editor here. I'm going to clean up the last stuff that the conversion tool didn't get for us. So first, this nodes array is pretty old and not needed anymore. I'm also going to get rid of the default events data since it'll go ahead and do that on its own. I'm also going to switch the DHT to the legacy library. It's the same library that was used previously. I'm just going to make sure that things are consistent with my old system. It also looks like it didn't update the pin format for us. I'm going to go ahead and update that for each one of my sensors as well. Moving on to the control, I'm also going to update the pin format and remove this update interval so it goes to the default. Next, looking at the toggles, I need to also update their pin formatting to the same changes we did above. I'm going to also remove the topic so it defaults. I'm going to replicate these changes for all the toggles. The other thing I was previously doing was using custom actions to turn on and off all these toggles. This is because MudPi used to not always have such actions available by default, and you kind of were required to put them in on your own. We can go ahead and remove all these now, along with all the triggers to trigger them, and just use the default ones that are available. So first I'm going to go ahead and find them all and remove them all from my configuration, and then I'll update my existing triggers to the new format and make sure that we can just use those. So now that I got those all removed out of there, I'm going to go ahead down to my toggles here and check out the keys. And using that key, I'm going to go down to my action and my trigger here and turn it into the key followed by the action I want. So I'm going to turn the pump 2 on using the turn on action that's available. The documentation lists all the actions that MudPi exposes for you. Depending what component you're using, you have different actions available. For example, with the toggles, we have turn on, turn off, and toggle. I'm going to make sure all of my actions are following this format of key followed by the action I want. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and move on up to my toggles, and there's a couple other settings I want to add back onto there now. The main one that I'm interested in is the max duration. This is a failsafe that you can set that will shut off your toggle in the event that it's been on longer than the set duration. This is useful if you want to make sure that devices aren't left on longer than intended. So for example, if I'm watering my garden in 10-minute intervals, I may set a max duration for 11 minutes, so that way if it's been on for a little bit longer than the water duration, it's probably not supposed to be on and should be shut off. The max duration is set in seconds, so go ahead and set that to whatever's appropriate for you. By default, if no max duration is set, it won't even do this check. I think that concludes most of the changes that we needed to do this configuration file. I think the next step is to go ahead and save it over to our Raspberry Pi and try to run it and see what happens. I'm going to turn on my unit that's got a new copy of Raspberry OS and MudPi installed to it so we can copy our files. I'm using the scp command again to copy my file from my machine to the Raspberry Pi. I'm going to save it as the default file name for the configuration file. Remember that we also have a MudPi user account set up for us this time that runs MudPi, and the directory structure has changed for MudPi. I'm going to copy this file over into the default location using the default file name. I'm going to SSH into our Raspberry Pi next to make sure that it got the new file. I'm going to connect in using the MudPi user account and the default password of MudPi app. Listing out the files in the core installation directory, I can see that our configuration file was copied over. We're going to see if MudPi is running in the background right now, and if it is, we'll stop it. It looks like checking the status of MudPi though, it's already stopped. We're going to be running MudPi manually the first time anyway to make sure there's no additional error messages that need to be addressed. Running MudPi using the MudPi command, we can see everything's loaded successfully, so that's a plus. I'm going to go ahead and let it install anything that's needed and see if there's anything else that needs to be done. Looks like I had a small error with my controls, but everything else booted up. Nothing caught on fire, so that's also a huge plus. I'm testing out my pumps using a light that I hooked up. I toggled stuff from the dashboard and everything functioned correctly. This unit, I also installed a control in the front for manual operations. It's still wired up correctly, but let's make sure that the relays are still getting toggled. If I keep pushing things here, I can see that the relays are actually turning on and off. This means that I set up the controls and migrated the triggers correctly. Everything should be set up and we're ready to deploy back out in the field. All I had left to do was install the unit back outside and hook up my final components like my pumps and sensors and valves. Since I tested everything inside on the bench, I was already pretty confident that most of the changes we had were already going to work. Now we have a unit that's running on the latest version of MudPi. And also, since we converted our previous configuration file, we should still have the exact same functionality that we did before. But now we have access to all the new features and optimizations available in the latest version. That wraps up this video, everybody. I'm glad you came along for the ride. Thank you for your continued support on the project. God bless you all, and we'll see you in the next one.